Moving on, and the window is closing in many parts of the state for late alfalfa harvest, but it seems that window may be open a bit longer for some in southeast Nebraska. Market Journal's Bill Dodd spoke with Extension educator Megan Taylor about a few things to consider if you're planning a late cutting.
As the days get shorter and the temperatures inevitably drop, alfalfa is beginning to go dormant. October, or Halloween hay as some people call it, will undoubtedly be high quality, but for every reward, there is a risk involved. So you'll want to be selective about which fields take a late cutting. When doing so, there are several variables to consider.
Really, those fields that have only been cut 3 times, for whatever reason, logistically, whether, you just have them set up that you're only going to cut those fields 3 times, or, it was too wet, or whatever it may have been this year. In the same vein, if you have fields that have only, if they are cut on a 30-day plus rotation, so if there's 30 days plus in between each cutting, those fields would also be good candidates. Stands that are under 3 years old, those are going to be really important. Those that have adequate soil fertility, and we're looking at a pH that's near or around 6.8. Well-drained fields where you don't have the risk of having any ponding or there's no drainage issues. Stands that have a low incidence or history of crown rot are going to be really valuable as well. And then the varieties that have been chosen in the past couple of years that have high disease tolerance and then also high winter hardiness ratings as well. Those are going to be the ones you're really going to want to key in on if you're planning on doing this late season, October, even pushing into early November hay.
There are usually 2 major logistical challenges to taking and cutting this late in the season: harvest and weather. While many producers are still in the fields harvesting other crops, it appears the weather may be more favorable than usual this year for many producers to take advantage of a late cutting.
Luckily, we have had really good weather across the state of Nebraska. We have had some pretty high winds, which is good if we are talking about making alfalfa in later October. Really, the big logistic challenge for doing this is getting it dry. We just don't have as much. We haven't traditionally had the heat. We haven't traditionally had the non-cloudy days. We just haven't had the temperatures to be able to get it very dry. But this year it's kind of looking like maybe, that's not going to hold true for us. So the biggest logistic would just be getting it dry and then getting it baled up timely. Those would be probably the 2 biggest things if you decide to do this.
When thinking of risk and reward, some risks are more manageable than others. While it may seem counterintuitive, wet hay does pose a serious fire hazard. However, this can be avoided if properly monitored.
If that material is really high moisture, when we bale it, what happens is in the center we can have heat because you're still going to be having some microbes that are going to be respiring. And so you're going to have chemical reactions going on within the bale. And as the bale heats up, it's going to heat from the inside out. And what happens is you can have fire risks associated with them. So a good rule of thumb, if you are worried about having bales that could be combustible, or if you do have to put up hay and it's a little bit wetter than you're used to, if you are going to be doing small squares, 20% moisture, you do have an added risk, and you really need to monitor those bales. For large rounds or large squares, you're looking at 16% moisture, and you really need to monitor those even if it's stored inside or outside. And you can monitor that internal temperature. That's probably the best way to do it. So once you have them stacked or once you have them stored, and if you do, have bales that are starting to get internal temperatures that are above 130, that's when you really need to be concerned. And you just need to be really, really careful when you're working with hay that's wetter than you're used to, because again, you can have these fire risks.
Aside from fire risk, there are a few other possible drawbacks and logistical challenges you may want to consider when taking a late season cutting. A long winter or finite amount of sunny fall days could cause added stress to the stand, resulting in less than ideal output the following year.
I think one of the things to keep in mind is if you do decide to use alfalfa, if you do decide that you need the forage, and if you do need the forage and the stands aren't meeting these requirements, you can still do it. It's just that you may see a little bit of a delay come spring in terms of the vigor of the stand or weed pressure. And the other thing to keep in mind is that if the haying probably is just logistically not going to work out for you, or if you're trying to get around some of those drying issues, you can always use a conditioner to speed the dry down. You can always spread the windrows wider to try to get as much sunlight on them to cure them and get them dry. You could also consider using a preservative to protect the hay as well, or you could consider making haylage. Haylage for this October alfalfa can be really, really high quality, and it kind of saves you from having to get it dry. So haylage is also an option if you're thinking about taking some late season alfalfa cuttings.
While current conditions seem to be favorable for many alfalfa producers in the state to harvest deeper into the fall than usual, when choosing which fields would make suitable candidates for a late season cutting, be sure to choose wisely. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.